Well, hey there, highlighters. Erin King here, and today's guest is a Silicon Valley marketing mega superstar, best-selling author, coach, trainer, and a pretty badass human. We got Christina Del Villar on the Highlights podcast. Hey,
Hey,
Christina.
yay! Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I loved your
Yeah,
book. I love your
thank you.
content. You're a smart
Thank you.
cookie, and I know my highlighters are just going to love, love, love you. So,
Amazing.
yeah, so I read that you are a unicorn. You're an original San Franciscan. Is
Oh,
that true?
it's true. Like a fifth generation, fourth or fifth generation San Franciscan. So definitely a unicorn. But here's a funny thing. I literally just moved to Reno, Nevada. So
Oh, that's a big switch. Better taxes,
it's a
that's for
big change.
sure.
Better, way better taxes. Yeah, I get 4 seasons. It's been great so far.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on your move
Thank
and on like all
you.
your success with your books and
Yeah.
your coaching and your training. So you're my old pedigree. I was a B2B gal, and then I
Oh,
came over to the dark
awesome.
side. I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the solopreneur kind of gal now, but I think it's always super interesting to glean big insights from
Yeah.
the B2B minds that are out there. I mean, you've worked with, I think, Oracle and Adobe and all the big fish out there. So my highlighters, as you know, a lot of them are small business owners. They are entrepreneurs. We have some corporate gals who maybe have a little side hustle or aspire to be an
Right.
entrepreneur, or just they lead a team and they have a really entrepreneurial mindset. So,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, I think that your book, your method are going to really serve them, um, especially when it comes to doing sort of an audit of their marketing strategy. I mean, these gals and a few good men are they're basically kind of their own marketing directors. So
Yeah.
if they are taking a look at their influence and their email marketing and their social digital kind of their whole footprint, where do they start to even
Yeah.
begin to audit like how they're doing, where they should focus, where the pain points are? Like, what's the first step of a marketing audit, would you say?
That's a great question. And I think, to your point, Aaron, yeah, I've worked in B2B, but I've also worked with a lot of startups. Obviously, I have
Okay.
my own company now. So I get sort of the entire gamut and range. And when I wrote the book Sway, my goal was it really is applicable to anybody in any industry, regardless of whether you're a solopreneur, you are the CEO of a large company, you're a marketing manager just starting off. Really, the concept is that you need to develop trust and influence generally within your own organization. So like if you're, a B2B, then you have that. But
Yep.
if you are on your own, you still need to understand the influence. Even if you have your own company and you think you're a solopreneur, you have other people you work with, right? You have your other vendors, you have your graphic designers who you outsource to, your consultants and contractors. And then, you're going to start to build your own teams over time. But
Yep.
I think the key thing is when you're thinking about marketing and that go-to-market strategy, what I've seen lately is a lot of people don't know what a true go-to-market strategy actually is. And it doesn't matter how big or small you are, how established, if you're just starting off, you need to think about how you're going to go to market, right? Makes sense. But from your standpoint, if you're thinking again about that audit and that marketing, a lot of people, marketing isn't their, it's not something that they know, they understand. They started their company because of a love that they had for whatever their company does, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing dog biscuits, you love baking for dogs, right? Like
Yeah.
it can be anything. But you do need to understand that you're going to need to sell and market yourself, your company, your products, your solutions. And so I think the key thing really is just understanding who your audience actually is,
Mm.
what your product is, and why you have that product or solution, right? And I think the larger you get as a company, again, whether you're a big, Oracle of the world, you can sometimes get away from that and kind of forget that you really should be focused on the customer. So I think that that's kind of the key thing is really think about your customer, your product, the why you're doing what you're doing, and how that's helping solve problems for them.
Yeah, and I love that. It's marketing 101,
I
right?
know
It's
it's
like know thy
it's
customer,
common sense,
but it's
basic,
so
but
hard to do. It's really easier said
yeah,
than done. And no
right,
matter how many times we've heard it and we've seen it work. I mean, whether it was, my social media agency, I started it 10 years ago when we were everything to everyone, we were eking along with these small little customers. Well, it wasn't until we said, okay, who are we really for? And we
Right.
figured, you know what? We want to be the social media agency specifically for live events only. We're not going to
Right.
do rep management. We're not going to do personal branding. We're not going to do community management. We're just going to be the live
You're not
event
gonna boil the
gals.
ocean. You're not
Yeah.
gonna do
And then it took off.
bespoke. You're yeah,
And that's when it took off.
yeah.
That's when we got the Oscars and Fashion Week and all these huge
It's
organizations
amazing.
because we actually had the discipline to niche down. And I think that really is the word. Even my speaking and coaching business, I'm like, I love network marketers. They're my people.
Yeah.
And the
They're
minute that I
great.
became for them, it
Right.
exploded again. So it's like I've seen it work myself. I know for a fact it's easier said than done. So how do we begin to niche down and figure out who are we really for? Like, is there a
Yeah.
formula? Because obviously, if you, for example, a lot of my listeners do a lot of wellness products. Who couldn't
Right.
use better health, right? It's like
Right.
it's like everyone, like
We're all perfect.
skincare. Like, do you have a face? You need better
Right.
skincare, right? It's like
Then
so.
you need some
How do they
skincare.
like how? What's the Christina sort of approach
Yeah.
to kind of deciding, I guess, who you're
It's
for and who that customer is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And I think we will all want to do everything. We all want to be everything to everybody. But you can't do that. You need to focus. You need to find what your niche is, and really focus and target that, because then your messaging will make more sense. Everything will kind of come together. And I think there's a couple of ways that I look at it. If you are developing, you've done the research, you know that there's a market need out there, and you develop your product or solution. Again, doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's skincare or artificial intelligence software. As you start iterating on what that product is, you might change a little bit and decide, well, this is the area we need to go in. So here's an example. When I wrote the book, my first thought was I would write the book for the C-suite, telling them like how what marketing does and why they should embrace marketing and how they should set them up for success. So I had my outline and everything, and then I started to talk to a bunch of CEOs and CMOs, and they're like, we're excited you're writing a book. This is going to be amazing. And I'm like, great. Then you can take what I say and put it into practice. And they're like, no, we hate marketing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well.
Yeah. That's
So then I
tough.
had to, right? So then I had to like rethink it. Like, well, then what am I trying to do? I'm trying to help women in particular. I'm trying to help
Mhm.
marketing people do a better job at marketing, have more influence internally. So I shifted my entire philosophy, literally my entire company in my book, and now focus on helping individuals gain that influence so that they can then take it to the leader, instead of the leader saying like, we recognize what you do. I'm telling people now how they can show their impact and influence. So you might have an idea of what the market needs, you might have an idea of what your target is, but until you actually kind of build it and start going out, you might not be hitting the right area. So you do need to think about it. You need to have those conversations with your customers. You need to sort of evaluate your product and solution at least often enough as you're first starting out, so that you know that you're hitting it right. Like with you, you were like, we can do this and we can do that and we can do that. And it probably took maybe about a year or a little bit more to figure out like, okay, we need to be very specific. We need to have a target. And
Yeah.
once you do that, then now you, Aaron King, and your enterprise, you can now actually start going out more if you want to, right? You don't have to, but you certainly can. But if you start out here, it's kind of like everything's all over the place. So
Yeah.
it's hard to focus, but you need to think about, again, it kind of goes back to the customer and what their needs are, and are you fulfilling those needs?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And we kind of I remember the day we did it, where it was one of those all the things anxiety days that we have, where there's certain mornings where you wake up as an entrepreneur and you're like, am I the world's most savvy CEO? Like everything's working,
You're like, yes,
like
I am.
yeah, like you're like life by design, you had the green juice, everything's time blocked. Like there's certain days where you're just in flow. Like you can hear Enya just
Oh,
playing in the
right.
background, right? And then there's other days you wake up and you're like, am I having a panic attack? Am I ever going to dig out? Like, why is everything a
Yeah,
hot mess?
you're like,
And
WTF? Is this
yeah,
really happening? Is this
it
a
was one
dream?
of those days. Yeah. And so we just sat down with the team and we literally drew three big circles. And the three big circles were number one, who do we actually not hate working with? Like, who do we
Right. Well,
actually
that's
like?
a great point.
Like, who are the people on our calendar when we have upcoming alarm and you're like, oh, I love them. I hit up this
Yay.
meeting. And other people you're like, oh my God, get me through this meeting. So we first identified who do we
Call in
like.
sick.
Yeah, like who do we like? The second circle that we asked ourselves was we were looking and we said, who can we actually really help? Who's really our GM? Because everyone can do everything sort of, but what's
Right.
actually the one area where we're kind of know what we're talking about, where people are always like, oh God,
Right.
that was really good, right? And then the third was where is there an actual physical like relevant, hyper relevant need now, like in this season now. And for us, it was
Right.
live events because back then people didn't have their own in-house social media people. So it was
Right.
really convenient for them to outsource it just for the life cycle of the event. So anyway, so that's
Makes
what we
sense.
did to kind of hone in on it. But everyone has their own process, obviously. And you have a process. You have
Yeah.
a method that I love called the grit method. I love a good
Yeah.
method. I have the pub method. I love a good tell me the
Red paper.
steps, tell me the questions.
Tamson's got a method. We all,
The
and
red thread.
yeah,
Yes.
great. Hers is
So,
great.
so you have the grit method that you talk through
Yep.
in your book. And I'd love for you to kind
Yeah.
of lay that out for our highlighters. And then I know the one that I think we as entrepreneurs struggle with the most, but I want to hear your
Right.
opinion too. But let's go through it first and then we'll unpack sort of the
Awesome.
hardest one, the hardest part of the method.
Sounds good. Yeah. So it's called the Grit Marketing Method. And again, while I wrote it specifically for marketing managers, it's again applicable and useful to anybody in any role. And basically the G stands for go to market. So we've talked a little bit
Yeah.
about that go to market strategy. Like what does it mean to understand your goals and align everybody in your organization, collaborate together and move forward towards that goal. The R stands for what I call RPM, repeatable, predictable, and measurable. And this kind of goes to what we're talking a little bit about. It's about being effective and efficient in your job, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to recreate the wheel every time. You don't need 20 case studies. Maybe you can use one and just leverage it differently. You can
Mm-hmm.
do like what we're doing here. We can now transcribe this and write a book, not a book. We can write blog post. We can write a book. Why? Let's do it.
If we go all morning, who knows?
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's about being smart with the content that you're creating and the programs you're creating and figuring out how to reuse them. And again, if they're working for these folks that we're talking to, if you've come up with a campaign that works or a program that works, why then like create another one, like figure out how to use the one that's working and maybe just use it a little differently. So that's the RPM. And then obviously making sure that you can measure what it is that you're doing and investing in. The I stands for intention. And this is really key for me because everything I do, pretty much everything I say and do is with intent. And I think that that's important. And again, it kind of goes to what we're talking about. If somebody asks you for something and you're like, okay, sure, you need this and we'll bespoke this product or solution out for you, that's not really intentional, right? Because it doesn't go to your niche, your target, what it is that you do. And so just always being laser focused is really critical because that's going to get you
So
and your
hard.
team.
Yeah.
It is hard. It is hard, but the more you kind of practice it, it's kind of like a meditation or mantra. It's like just really be intentional with what it
Yeah.
is that you're doing.
I love that
And then
one.
I like it too. The T is for tools and technology because I think in every company, you need to understand the infrastructure in your operations so that you are running effectively and not so focused on sort of the administration component of your business, but really focused on the strategic and the areas that you specialize in and
Yeah.
are skilled at. So,
Yeah, that's
so
so
that's
good.
great. Super,
I
super
love grit.
simple.
And you built this method based on what you were doing inside the walls of some of the world's biggest companies that you
Yeah.
did kind of same thing that I did where it's like you had sort of this intuitive way that you operated. You were leading teams, you were driving results. And just like me, if someone's like, well, like how are you doing this? And you kind of taught
Right.
it here and there. And then all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, okay, how can I reverse engineer?
That's
I
exactly
know
what
how to
I
do it.
did.
Like it's easy for me, but how do I
Right.
actually create something that someone can repeat if they don't have my brain? And so I love that you
Right.
broke that down. Now tell me, which step do you think your clients struggle with the most? Or how about
So,
pardon. How
yeah.
about your entrepreneurial clients? Which one did they struggle with the most?
Yeah, so I think the entrepreneurial, they struggle a lot with that go-to-market strategy
Okay.
because again, they are creating a company based on, something that they're passionate about, right? And it's like I started my company. I'm passionate about marketing, but even I'm not going to do my own marketing. I don't have time, and so I outsource that. I'm not good at finance or accounting. I outsource that, right? I didn't start my company to like, look at spreadsheets. So you really need to be mindful about your strategy and the areas that you yourself are going to focus on. Like, what are your skills? And then make sure that you're supplementing your team, whether through, actual employees or through vendors, to make sure that you have the team in place that you need so that you can then kind of take everything to market with that strategy. And again,
Yeah.
the strategy, it incorporates, in my mind, doesn't matter again if you're B2B or B2C or an entrepreneur or solopreneur or have channel on Etsy. You have to think about your product and your solution. You think about your marketing, exactly like what campaigns and programs you're going to implement. You need to think about the sales component, and then you need to think about customer support and success. And all of those make up your strategy. And I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes you hear like, and I do this all the time, people are like, can you look at my go-to-market strategy? And I'll take a look at it, and like within 3 seconds, I'll be like, yeah, by the way, this is a sales plan and it's great, but it's not a go-to-market strategy. And so I think that entrepreneurs really need to think about it, and it can be scary, right? Like, again, marketing, sales, maybe not their area of expertise,
Yeah.
but you own a company now, so you've got to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah. No, well
Scary.
said. Well
Yeah.
said. Um, so you talk a lot in your book about the power of, well, actually, let's back up. So I think the one that I personally have the hardest time with of that entire process is the R, is the repeatable. And here's why.
Yeah.
Because as entrepreneurs, we are creatives, and part
Yes.
of what gets us juiced and jazzed and fired up is the actual creating for creation's sake.
Makes
The
sense.
the Liz Gilbert big magic, just loving it for the journey and the process and the flow, and time flies because you're creating something. And so for
Right.
me, the hardest thing that I struggle with is not constantly reinventing because I enjoy it. So, like, for example,
Yeah.
I had my book Digital Persuasion. We published it in 2017, and I'm like, let's recover it for post pandemic and update it and and it's like, well, we're selling more copies like last week than we've sold ever. Obviously, it's fine though. Do I really need to add this onto the plate, or am I just doing it because I like to reinvent stuff? So the
Right.
discipline of repurposing content, and especially if you're a one person shop, like if you don't have a
Right.
team, repurposing content is and you talk a lot of this in your book about, we don't have to always more. Like, let's
Right.
surface the anchor piece that has really made a difference, and
Yeah.
how can we reposition it across the web, right? So
Right.
talk about that. How can we have more
Yeah.
discipline to do that?
And you're right, especially like for your audience. We're creative people, and there's satisfaction in seeing something maybe new or net new.
Mhm.
But to your point, you were doing repeatable, right? You took a book that you already had and you updated it, right? And so maybe it took you 20% of the time or effort instead of 100% of the time or effort. And maybe you'll get to a point when that doesn't work and you actually do need to create something net new. But it's kind of about being just really smart. You wrote this pillar, I call it a pillar piece. You wrote this pillar piece, and now how can you, and it should be concise. It has your messaging. There's consistency in it. So how can you use it over and over again in new ways and with new audiences and new channels? And again, maybe a new cover. But it's really about, you've spent the time to create that piece that is going to have that impact, and now like leverage the heck out of it, right? And again,
Yeah.
you can take your book and now you can write blog posts, or you can go on other podcasts. You can turn into social media. You can tape it and turn into videos. You can take the case studies out of it and leverage those. There's so much that you can do just with that one piece of content, and you're just trying to extend the life of it. And again, at some point, it's like it's dead, and move on kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you have to, again, you use what you already created, and you'll just get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, it's so well said. And I think what's interesting is your pillar. I like that term, pillar piece. I
Pillar
think
piece.
sometimes it's like, well, what is my pillar piece? How do
Yeah.
I find out what that is? I mean, I know for me, I suffered from shiny objects, social
No,
media, shiny
sure.
object syndrome
I'm on
for a
Clubhouse now,
long
TikTok,
time.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yes, and I found that kind of like what you said earlier, where you looked at someone's go-to market strategy, and within a couple minutes, you were able to quickly surface what was missing and what it really was, because it's so much easier to be a coach than a player sometimes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
for me, I have done social strategy for the world's biggest brands. When it comes to my own content, I'm a hot mess. I can do it for
Right.
everybody else. I can't perform surgery on myself though.
Right.
And so I think it can be tricky. And so what helped me finally surface my pillar piece, which is now from a content standpoint, it's my podcast. I was like,
Right.
what do I really enjoy doing? Like of your entire list that you have to create, what is the one that like gives you the least amount of anxiety, the most joy? And for me, it was
Right.
meeting cool gals like you and learning and expanding my network and showing up in a conversational way. And so
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I don't have to do 3 weekly e-newsletters and
Right.
create all these GIFs and memes. And I had
Right.
this huge, all the things that you can do just because you can do
Right.
it. Like, should you? And it wasn't until I said, okay, my podcast is my pillar piece.
Yeah.
Everything else spokes out from there. So now my emails, my social, my stories, everything
Yeah.
maps back to my podcast. Not
Right.
only is it easier, it's more fun and it serves my audience better because it's not a sprinkling of little random thoughts. It's actually a well thought out strategic service. I hope
Right.
that's
No,
the
it
idea
did.
anyway. So
Yeah. And again,
how do they find that? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say that kind of goes to both this, well, it goes to the strategy, it goes to the repeatable component, and it also
Yeah,
goes to intent, right? And so,
yeah,
so to your point, like, how do you find that? How do you develop that pillar piece? For me, it's my book, right? And again, it's going to be different for everybody because my book
yeah,
now, I'm turning it into a course. I'm doing workshops with it. I'm doing go-to-market strategy audits, and it all comes back to that book. And to your point, I loved writing it. I love the content. I love teaching it and sharing the concept with people. And so for me, that is my pillar piece. For other people, to your point, it's like, what, where's your passion? And to your earlier, piece, like when you wake up in the morning, what do you want to do? Like, what's the first thing? Like, you got to get through
yeah,
your emails and you're going to have your coffee. But like, then what do you like? This is what I want to do. Like, you want to get on the podcast, right? You want to talk to people and have guests, and you also go to other people's podcasts too. And that's kind of where your joy comes from. And then, you need to figure out like, how then can I again extend that content, right? So you have your podcast, and then you can do blog posts from it, you can do your email blast from it, you can do your social media from it. And so it really is just sort of, and again, everybody's going to be different, right? Like, yours is podcast, mine is the book, somebody
yeah,
else's might be like Instagram videos or TikToks, right? It really
yeah,
just, it's going to be what's right for them, and they'll kind of know it when they feel it. It's
yeah.
like, if you look at all the things you need to do in a given day or given week, to your point, like, what is it that you're like, I'm going to do that first? Maybe never get to anything else because that's what
Yeah.
I like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And I also think that we oftentimes don't know right away. There's sort of
Right.
this period. And I've heard a story that you told, I think it was on one of your podcasts. It might have been in your book. I forget. But you were telling a story about a webinar where you had 80,000 people
Oh,
join,
yeah.
and you had a beautiful takeaway about just the patience that's involved with the expectations and projections around a sales cycle. And I think the
Yeah.
story you told had to do with a CEO, but for us, it still is applicable, like, because maybe
Yeah.
sometimes we put pressure on ourselves for things to happen yesterday. So can you share that
Right.
story and sort of the big
Sure.
takeaway for our
Yeah.
highlighters? Yeah.
So it was at Udacity, and we were moving from a B2C to a B2B, and again, it's applicable even if you're an entrepreneur. But we started doing a thought leadership webinar series, and we were launching our artificial intelligence courses, and so I really wanted to get some thought leaders and industry thought leaders, not necessarily those that had helped create the content or those that had used Udacity before, but like literally industry experts. So I got Dr. Kai-Fu Lee to come on and do a webinar with us. And we ended up having 80,000 people on the webinar, which, I mean, I knew it was going to be big. I didn't know it was going to be that big.
That's
Um,
insane.
it was, oh yeah, it was insane. Like, I'm just kind of watching the thing. I'm obviously producing this webinar, but I'm
Yeah.
also like on the
Look
side,
at
like looking at the numbers, and
You're
I'm
like,
like,
there's so many
is
digits
that
there.
8,000? Does that say
Yeah.
80? What is that? It's like, I'm literally, my admin's like showing me, yes, it's 80,000.
I hope you
Um,
upgraded your Zoom. Hopefully you had a big enough platform to
we
hold
we did, yeah,
everybody.
we
I
have
was gonna
multiple
say,
platforms, right? I mean,
yeah,
maybe today we'll get up to 80,000. We'll see, like,
yeah, yeah,
crash Facebook. Um, but the takeaway was like, this is the biggest thing that they'd ever done. And the very next day, I was with the CEO and the GM of B2B, and they were like, yeah, congratulations, that's great. And they literally said, when, like, how do we know how much revenue we brought in? And I'm like, you mean from the webinar we did yesterday? Like, we don't have any revenue from the webinar we did yesterday, right? Like, our sales cycle is 12 months. So this was the start of that sales cycle.
Yeah.
And I told them I had a good relationship with them. So I think I pretty much told them to, F off and check back in 12 months because, that was kind of crazy. But
Yeah.
the key takeaway from that was that I didn't set proper expectations with them ahead of time, right? Like, they saw 80,000 people on a webinar and they're like, oh my God, it's going to make us millions. And in my mind, in my team's mind, it's like, great. Now we're going to take those leads. We're going to nurture them in marketing. At some point, we'll move them over to sales. Sales will work them. And then at some point they'll close. And so, I think that you need to be honest with yourself and set those expectations. And, again, it could be, your sales cycle better than anybody. So you should have a good understanding of that. But I think, even for entrepreneurs who have startups and are looking for investment, you're talking to investors, you're talking to your friends and family who might be investing, and certainly you're talking to yourself. You just need to know that you just need to be honest with when you're going to start seeing things coming in, either from a lead standpoint, a conversion standpoint, a revenue standpoint. And
Yeah.
that was super key. They understood, like, immediately as soon as I said, well, our sales cycle is 12 months. So come back to me in 12 months and I'll tell you how much revenue we brought in. But I should have set those expectations, again, even like internally with myself, with my team, and with everyone who was sort of involved in that, so that they knew going into it and could then celebrate the 80,000 and not be like, oh, what do you mean we don't have any revenue? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's also, I love that story, and I think because a lot of us are our own sales director and marketing
and a
director
marketing and right
and every hat, that
COO and CEO.
yeah, but what I love, the kind of what you're advocating for, and nothing better than a lesson that we've learned ourselves because we've walked that
Yeah.
walk, is oftentimes we don't delineate between social selling and social marketing, that
Right.
marketing is to support sales, and that it is
Yes.
two different activities, two different life cycles. And when we put sales expectations around marketing efforts, it can feel like maybe a totally mislabeled letdown or
Right.
underwhelming experience, and we should instead be super clear about what success is going to look like,
Right.
ahead of time, which I think is so hard because, like, well, more is always more, right?
Right.
But maybe that's not
Right.
always what it should be.
And, I think the other thing, especially for entrepreneurs, is to celebrate those moments,
Yes.
right? And I'm not saying like, okay, now wait 12 months and then celebrate. Like, celebrate the 80,000 people that came to the webinar. Celebrate the fact that, this was the launch of a new, solution, and continue to celebrate as you convert them or as they become, as you nurture them along. And I think that that's really, really important for folks. So.
Well, I needed to hear that personally. You're preaching right to me today because
Right?
it's the
Yeah.
internet is, I mean, this black scroll hole. I mean, we
Yeah.
had something that went live a couple weeks ago, and we saw the metrics and we were just psyched. We were like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that feels good. That felt like success. Well, then sure
Right.
enough, 2 minutes later, you're scrolling down and she has 4 times and you're like, and then all
Right.
of a sudden your joy is stolen because of the
Right.
comparison trap. And we have to be so
Yeah.
protective to not let that happen because we work too hard to not celebrate those little wins and there's always a little win.
Absolutely.
Every day there's
Oh,
one little win,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that it's really important. I mean, I'm not saying like, just walk around and pat yourself on the back all day, but
Yeah.
you have, like you're saying, there are wins every day and you need to celebrate that. I'm not the best at doing that. I often
I'm
give
not
my
either.
team credit, right? So I'll be like, yeah, that was great. The launch of the book was great. Thanks, team. Social media group, you guys did great. And then people are like, but you wrote the book. I'm like, yeah, but it was a team effort. And they're like, eh. So I need to
Right.
do that myself better as well. I think we all need, and I think it's
Same.
a problem women have, I believe.
Mm.
We don't take we need to take credit, and that's okay to do that, right? And it's not selfish. You're still supporting your team and know that it was a team effort, but individuals also need to kind of step up and take ownership of that and celebrate that.
Yeah, well said. And sometimes I think we look at the facts and not the feelings, which I
Yeah.
think the feelings can be a metric. Like,
Oh, yeah.
feeling joy about
Right.
something, why can't that be a KPI? Why can't that
Yeah.
be like an HPI, like a heart performance indicator or something? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much that that we can celebrate, and to authorize ourselves
Yeah.
to do that is something that, just like you, I've had to literally, because I remember one day I was, after I published my most recent book in June, and we were celebrating and we had the launch party, and I kept waiting for the feeling of success, and it
Yeah.
wasn't coming.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here like, this is a top 5 publisher. This is the big pivot you've always wanted to, like, you through all, like, your head is telling you this is success,
This
but
is
my
good.
heart wasn't catching up with it. And
Yeah.
so I realized I had a major problem with that. And so
Yeah.
since then,
Same.
I've started, kind of like you said earlier, like a muscle that you practice, whether it's focus or celebration or gratitude or fitness, anything else like that. I started to try to every single day, not every day, but most days, at least find one thing and sort of trick myself into feeling joy. And over the last couple months, I will say I have started to feel a little more like organic success feeling, whatever
Yeah.
that is for everyone.
Yeah.
But it was really intentional. I had to sort of trick myself into it and start to practice it, because otherwise we get to the summit of the mountain, we look around and we're like, well, there's a bigger peak over there. And then what's the point? We're on this hedonic treadmill. None of us
Right.
get off. And what's
Yeah.
the point of it all,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Yeah, I mean,
tricky.
it goes back to intention, and I think it also goes to what you're saying, like what does success? There was like three things that I wanted out of the book. I wanted people um, to use it, understand it, and use it, and have successes in their own right. And even with the beta readers, I had that, so that was like amazing. Like I had somebody who was a beta reader who was like, "Oh my god, I just implemented this with my team, and this is this."
Yay.
So I was like, "This is great. I helped one person. Like, yay!" and then that's okay. Like, move on. You don't have to like every day be like, "Oh yeah, I still help. Maybe I help two people now, right? Next day I help three people." But you do need to think about what that success looks like. And my book coach Stacy, that was one thing she did. She was like literally visualize what you want from the book. What kind of success you want from the book, right? And so, and I hit those pretty early on with the book, so that's great. So then I kind of needed to think, well, now what? What else is going to kind of give me that, that satisfaction? It doesn't have to be long term, but you should celebrate your wins, no matter how big or small. And again, I think as women, we don't do that. We give credit to other people a lot. And so one of the big things that the book talks about is actually empowerment. And I think that that's super key and critical for women and entrepreneurs. Is you need to Nobody's going to empower you. It's just the way the world is. Like nobody's going to
Yeah.
like, hand you a baton and be like, you are empowered. You need to empower yourself, right? And you need to empower yourself to celebrate the little things, to celebrate the big things, to say yes, to say no. I think that's really important for entrepreneurs, and we talked a little bit about that. Like we could do everything, but we want to be focused, and so you need to say no. I mean, it can be hard. You can literally say no to a customer, a potential customer, but you need to empower yourself to do that. And so there's just so much that goes along with that.
Well, I love that you brought that up, because I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah.
That I think we talk a lot about how to say yes to this, yes to the more to the more. We really
Right.
don't talk about what it takes to say no enough.
Yeah.
And I personally, I remember speaking in San Francisco, we had a client in San Francisco, and it was a major financial company. And I remember we walked into this shiny, gorgeous building, downtown San Francisco, floor to ceiling windows, the Golden Gate Bridge. Someone's assistant gave us like the vegan, coffee latte with like angel wing dust topping or whatever.
It's
And
amazing, the
we
pixie
were like,
dust,
we
yeah.
were like, we've made it. Like, we have made it. Well, this client ended up being just a nightmare. It was,
Yeah,
the harder we tried, the more we fell short. It was an unwinnable account. And
yeah,
it got to the point where I broke up with them. And
yeah,
it was immediately, I had complete regret. I'm like, what did I just do?
yeah.
We struggled to make overhead for a couple months after, so we had kind of replaced the income. It is not for the faint of heart to say no.
No,
But what
yeah,
I will say is, I wish you could measure the vibe in our office, because the minute we got rid of them, it was like a toxic boyfriend. We were
yeah,
like lonely and uncertain, but thrilled,
Like,
you
this
know,
feels good. This is going to be
free.
good. This is
Yeah.
great.
But it really,
Yeah.
it's really unsexy to talk about the fact that all of a sudden making overhead for like probably the next 4 or 5 months was a little hairy. I mean,
Right.
it's really hard to say no, and it's such a long game, but it really is worth it in the end.
It is. And I think, but like for you, what that enabled you and your team to do was be more focused and strategic with the customers that you did like, the accounts that you liked, and to spend that time and effort going after accounts that you would
Yeah.
actually, and clients that you would actually enjoy, instead of being in this toxic relationship. And it is, I mean, yes, it can be daunting. Can I swear on your show?
Heck yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
I go,
So
heck yeah. Hell yeah.
Heck
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. So I literally have what I call the clusterfuck premium. So if
Okay.
you like, I will choose my customers and my clients, and I can do that. And if you are like that nightmare customer and you're insistent, like, no, we need you, then I'll be like, great, but I got a clusterfuck premium, and I'll tell them straight up, and it's 50% more, because
Yes.
you guys are a nightmare, and it's going to take me longer, and it's going to use more of my mental energy. At the end of the day, it's still my choice, right? But again, I think you have to be able to say no, and especially if it's not in alignment with your strategy, right, or your products and solutions. And it is hard to say, it is hard to say no, but you as a company owner and founder and entrepreneur need to learn to say that, and you need to help your team learn to say that as well. So, because that's critical. I mean, it's just one thing for you to say no, but if your team, they need to know that that's a safe thing to do as
Yes.
well.
And
So
that's a really good point, because we'll preach certain things in
yeah,
theory. And then when someone has the audacity or the courage to step into their power and do it, they might get a little, nonverbal discouragement, a little more no girl, less go girl, or a little slap in the
right.
hand. And then they have now been taught and groomed that it's actually not
Yeah.
what's applauded in this environment.
Right.
So that's a really good
Right.
reminder as a leader to
Yeah.
reinforce that if you're going to preach it, you also need to celebrate it when they do take the initiative to do it.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
good. Well, we are an audience of bibliophiles. We are readers.
Amazing.
Everyone's obviously going to be reading Sway, which is a fabulous book about influence and the grit marketing method by Christina del Villar. Are you reading anything right now that has your attention? It could be personal or professional, nonfiction, that you're just really into, or that you have on your shelf and you can't wait to dive in, that you want to recommend to our
Yeah.
highlighters?
So I read a lot, and what I tend to do is I'll pick something up and start reading it, and then that'll kind of guide me to another area and stuff. So first off, I absolutely love your book. I think it's hysterical, right? It's like, yeah, you're kind of a big deal, because it goes to that empowerment too, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you need to know that you are a big deal. Even just thinking about a new product or a new solution and starting your own company is significant. I know you've had Tamsin on, Tamsin Webster, and she has the red thread methodology, and that is amazing, right? Because that's talking
So
about
good.
influence as well. Like, how do you get your ideas across? And it can be, you working in a big organization trying to be innovative with a product. It can be you going to investors trying to get them to understand it, or you can be you as an entrepreneur trying to sell to your potential clients, right? And it's just really important to think about, like, what are you doing and how are you influencing them? And it's literally like a step-by-step process that she has as well. It's so good, right?
It's the
um
best. I use
I
it all the
know.
time. I was in Dallas 3 weeks ago, and it was a client that had rehired me for the 5th time,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
to do a talk. And so it's always flattering, this you're a speaker as well. And it's so flattering when they bring you back, but at the same token, you've kind of done all your greatest hits. So you have to generate
Like,
new content on the fly. And I remember being like, oh my God, I did that joke last time, I did that story last time. No. So whenever I panic about a presentation about someone that's seen me 3, 4, 5 times, I go back to the red thread method, and I follow Tamsin's method to the letter. And I created a talk in literally 30 minutes using her red thread
oh,
method,
that's
and it killed.
great.
She's
That's
the
great.
best. She is the
Yeah.
best. So
And to your point, like, you're using it, from the standpoint of a talk, right? So you
mhm.
can use her process and methodology in a lot of different ways. The other one I'm reading right now is Ann Hyatt's book that just got released. It's called Bet on Yourself, and
Ooh.
yeah, it's great. she worked with executives. She's worked with a lot of executives, like at Amazon and I think Google. And she's just like literally like this is great for entrepreneurs and for women. It really helps you understand like how to what that process is for coming up with those ideas and then getting that implemented, whether it's in your own organization, it's with a company, it's with a new company you want to start as an entrepreneur or solopreneur. So those are some really good ones. And then more on the sort of business marketing side, there's a book out called CMO to CRO, because so it's a chief marketing officer to chief revenue officer, because I feel it's really important for marketers and marketing leaders and actually anyone in a marketing organization to know that they own the revenue. Like you're the one responsible for generating the revenue. You might not be selling, but you're the one who's out there with the brand, with the messaging. And it's just really important for everyone to know that like you own that revenue and that's your target. And so it's a really great book to get people's mindset kind of away from programs, brand, tactics, and more on the strategy revenue side of things.
Well, thanks, Christina. I'm going to read all those books this
Yeah,
weekend. I'm
they're
going to go to
great.
Amazon as soon as we jump off, and
Yeah,
I'm going to order both.
you're like, I'm going to order them now.
We need to get them on the podcast too.
Oh
my
yeah,
gosh.
you should. Anne, you should definitely have Anne on. She's amazing.
Would love that. Do you know her? I mean, I could
I
ask you
do.
for an
Yeah,
introduction.
I
That would
will
be great.
totally. Yes. Yeah,
Cool.
she's great.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you shared everything about your grit method. Sway is a dynamo book. You have an online course training program. You have coaching
Coming
programs.
up. Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
enterprise level training experiences and workshops and master classes. So,
All kinds of
where
good
is the
things.
best place for everyone to find more of Christina?
Yeah, so you can go to ChristinaDelVillar.com. That's really the best place. Swaythebook.com will also get you to that website. It's a little easier to remember.
Oh,
And then I'm on LinkedIn and I love connecting with entrepreneurs and women and people, who are listening to you. I think it's important for us to, build that community a bit more and help each other out. So, and empower each
amen.
other.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Christina.
you,
I
Erin.
appreciate you. It's great to see you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
let's talk again soon.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.